I don't like comic books. I don't read them, and I don't care if the movies are comic accurate or not. I just want good DC films, and I think sometimes filmmakers can make better decisions for these stories than the comics can. Hey everyone, welcome back to our movie news. Now, some of you may be surprised by this title, and today I want to explain what I mean. I've never actually been interested in comic books. I never grew up reading them, and I've never really been interested in wanting to read them. Now, why I think this is so important to talk about is because of a conversation I've been having with fans on Twitter regarding what suits Superman will wear in Superman Legacy. But the topic is relevant to every DC movie made and every DC movie that will be made in the DCU. It began with this Superman Legacy fan art. My problem isn't with the person who made this edit, it's with wanting to use the original suit from the comics in a modern day Superman film. Now, to me, this looks very cheap, cheesy, and honestly pretty bad. I think it's outdated and such a downgrade on the progression of Superman suits. It feels like 10 steps back. I personally couldn't really take this Superman seriously if he looks like this. My main problem are the trunks. I think they look really out of place on a modern day Superman. Now, saying this on Twitter obviously brought a lot of angry DC fans having a go at me for me not liking the design. Some even saying I'm not a real Superman fan. And it got me quite confused. Now, obviously, I know Twitter is an extremely toxic place where accounts will call you anything they want to without any cause, but what confused me was how many just couldn't understand why I didn't like the suit, as it was a key part of Superman's history. And then it hit me. They see me as a comic book fan rejecting the comic book history of the biggest DC hero of all time. But they don't know that I've never picked up a comic book. I've never had an interest in comic books. So to them, I'm a comic book nerd being disrespectful to the holy grail of DC's history. So I'm making this video to explain my true connection to comic book movies. I put this tweet out about this subject that I think explains it pretty well, but I want to expand on it a bit. I think I am actually closer to being a part of the general audience side of DC films than the comic book fan side. I've never read a comic book, I don't claim I've read one, and so my opinions on these films are from a general audience perspective, rather than a comic book one. When watching DC films, I'm not looking for comic accuracy, I'm just looking for a film I enjoy. Now, whether or not that matches comic book fans really depends on which fan you talk to, but I think it's important to note that my opinion never comes from how comic accurate something is. I really don't care if it's not comic accurate as long as I enjoy it. I grew up watching DC films, but I never read DC comics. I've always preferred watching superheroes rather than reading about them, which I guess is why there are certain DC films that I prefer to others, and why certain films or shows don't appeal to me as much as they do to comic book fans. It also really struck me as to why I may not be as excited for the DCU slate as others. If we go through it, I've never heard of Creature Commandos, Booster Gold, or The Authority, and have only heard of Swamp Thing from the Netflix show, and I don't really care about the Waller show. So 50% of the slate are projects I either have never heard of or don't really care for, which is because I've never been interested in the comics for it. So my hype is going to be far less than comic book fans who know and love these characters. I also wanted to talk about this subject because I hope it allows people to understand me in a new light, so they don't expect me to understand references or to be interested in certain projects or characters, or to review a film with comic accuracy in mind. So if I like certain aspects of DC films that are not comic accurate, it's not me being biased to either side. My opinion is just entirely formed on whether or not I like it, and it isn't influenced by comic accuracy. So, for example, with Superman, I just don't like the look of this suit because I feel that in the modern day, I would like Superman to look modern too. And seeing him wearing really tight cloth with his underwear on the outside looks really cheesy to me. I'd prefer a more modern look, one with thicker material that feels stronger, so that when Superman goes into fights, his suits will be more durable. I've heard that in the comics his mother makes his suit, but I would like more realism in my superhero films. so I'm pretty sure a suit made from cloth would be destroyed in Superman's first battle, which is why I prefer the Man of Steel approach of his suits being made from Kryptonian material, which makes it almost as strong as Superman himself. Another one is the Batman killing rule. I like the idea of Batman not killing, but when almost every live-action Batman has killed, I don't think it's that important. I think it's better for Batman to kill if it's a part of the story or his character arc, rather than just deaths that are ignored by the film. But if Batman kills, it doesn't upset me as much as it does some comic book fans. I also think if filmmakers have a better idea for the characters or storyline than the comics had, I think they should have every right to change it for their movies. If filmmakers are limited to what the comics create for these characters, then creativity will be limited. And for those who think directors and writers should stick to the comic books for their movies, what if a filmmaker had an idea for a DC movie that was scrapped as it wasn't comic accurate, and then was thought of by a comic book writer at a later date? Would you reject that movie if it was made before the comic book was made, but accept the movie if it was made after the comic book was made? It's an interesting question to ask. I know fans are very loyal to the comics, as that is where these beautiful films originated from. I just personally have no problems with filmmakers going away from comic accuracy as long as it's good. I just want good DC films and I want to enjoy them. So I would say I am part of the general audience more than comic book side. I know a bit more of the DC lore than most of the general audience, but nowhere near as much as hardcore comic book fans. I'm basically in between both sides. Now, I don't want to speak for all general audiences, but for me, what attracted me to DC films in the first place was Superman and Batman. Reeves' Superman and Keaton's Batman was what got me through the door. I have always preferred Superman, and I remember watching Superman 1 and 2 a lot as a kid. Then what changed the game for me was Nolan's Batman films. A serious, modern, realistic take on Batman was exactly what I wanted. Apparently, it's not that comic accurate, but to me, I love all three of those movies. Marvel was building out at the same time, and they had quite a few more jokes in their films, which was quite a nice contrast to Nolan's trilogy. And when Man of Steel came out, I had a new favourite Superman and DC film. Yet again, it was a serious, more realistic take on a DC favourite of mine, and still to this day, Man of Steel is my favourite DC movie. In fact, all my favourite modern DC movies have been serious or darker films. I love how different they are to Marvel's movies and how the stakes feel much higher as the characters are far more serious. So I've always been more interested in serious DC films than lighter-hearted or comedic ones. I associate DC with serious and Marvel with light-hearted. I've always been that way. So as a DC movie fan, I want to see more serious DC films, which is something I want to dedicate an entire video to. So for now, let's just focus on the main conversation, which is that I'm not a comic book fan, so my opinions on these DC movies are from almost a general audience perspective, as I have no interest in comic books and I don't care if something is or isn't comic accurate. I just want DC films that I enjoy. So hopefully you guys can understand a bit more about how I see DC films and where my opinion comes from. But make sure to let me know if you are a DC Comics fan or if you are like me and are just interested in the movies in the comments below. But that is all for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe and turn on post notifications so you never miss a video. I hope to see you here again soon. So until then, have a great day. Bye.